Hello and welcome to December the 4th on the TooFatLardies Advent Calendar for 2023. Here we are again with the next door. Let's unfold this tiny piece of paper and see what it says. What are good ways to end a game which include a feeling of achieving an objective, but also a plausible narrative, and also possibly give an indication of what implications of that victory are? Oh, gosh, that's a really interesting question. It merges together game design, but also scenario design. In fact, scenarios with a very specific and clear-cut objective are the simplest way to achieve all of those things. A plausible narrative, the scenario should provide that, an indication of what the implications of victory are. Well, the scenario can do that, but also we could place the scenario inside a campaign where the objectives are dialed up. The implications of achieving those objectives are dialed up even more. And obviously the feeling of achieving an objective can be set by a scenario as well. Scenarios with a very specific and clear-cut objective, by far the simplest way to do this: take the bridge, capture the castle, rescue the princess, all provide an obvious end to a chapter in a wargame adventure, which is what we hope our games are. That said, when designing such a scenario, some objectives are more clear-cut than others. For example, capture the bridge looks superficially clear-cut, but would sneaking one man through the bushes and then sprinting onto the bridge count as capturing it? Well, on a superficial level it is, but realistically, the objective there should be take and hold the bridge. A lone figure may well get through and stand on an objective, but it'll be rather like me standing on London Bridge and saying I now own it. Capturing would be a rather too strong description for that situation. In fact, anybody who's ever seen a great action programme or film will know that the heroes, Richard Sharp or whatever, regularly capture things. But the problem then only just begins. That's the nature of the story. Oh, look, we captured the bridge easily. And then all of a sudden, oh, what's that coming down the road? Holding the objective is then the problematic bit, and that's where the narrative and story begins. Now, of course, as a scenario designer, the difficulty comes in anticipating and measuring degrees of success. Sharp capturing the bridge and holding it against strong French counterattacks works brilliantly if he and his chosen men gun down the French grognards in their hundreds and they rout them from the field. It's a great storyline and it's a clear-cut victory. But it's less persuasive if our gallant rifles officer just scrapes it by holding it for the 2 turns that the scenario says they have to, and then declares a victory. But it's still very, very clear to all parties concerned that one more turn would have seen the bridge back in enemy hands. And this is the problem, and also the responsibility of scenario design, to find a plausible reason for the game ending when it does, because holding a bridge for 2 turns is arbitrary. And it doesn't take into account what the circumstances are. The Brits could be hanging on by their fingernails and clearly about to lose, or they could have swept the field of the French, and in which case, the victory looks absolutely splendid. Time constraints, of course, can be introduced. Maybe the French are limited in terms of the amount of time they've got by Spanish guerrillas operating in their rear, and they can only operate in daylight because the night belongs to Charlie or Carlos in the case of the Peninsular War, I suppose. To make things simpler, we could, of course, change the scenario so that the end is a very clear punctuation mark. So capture the bridge and demolish it would really serve that purpose. Even if we say, once you've captured the bridge, the invisible engineers who happen to be with you, you don't even have to have figures for them, will blow it up at the end of the second turn that you're holding it. So in that case, the demolition then serves as a natural and clear-cut end to the game. The moment the bridge goes bang, the game's over. So, but then again, there's a fault with that if we're playing in a campaign, for example, where the British need to keep the bridge intact. However, when designing your scenarios and saying what the objective is, I think taking into account what happens next will help to ensure that your games are plausible. Why do they have to hold the bridge? How long do they have to hold the bridge for? What are the circumstances in which the person who's captured the bridge would give up and go, or the circumstances in which the attacker would give up their attack and leave the bridge in the hands of the victor? Taking a little bit of time when designing a scenario to find a plausible reason for those things will certainly help achieve those objectives of feeling that the objective has been achieved, but it's a plausible narrative. And of course, we can look to our campaign setting to give pause for thought in terms of what the implications of that victory are. But there is a bigger question, and possibly a more interesting one, and that's about the way not scenarios are designed, but games are designed to come to an end. And that's not about scenarios, but about the rules. I mean, our first set of rules we published, I Ain't Been Shot Mum, was working from the premise that the game ended when one side or the other was no longer able to achieve its objective. I mean, I find that to be a perfectly reasonable mechanism, and certainly if you were putting a game on for a military organisation, they would find that pretty plausible in most situations. However, time constraints are real. You've got phase line objectives to achieve in a certain amount of time. Certainly, it rather shocked some of the gamers who were first introduced to I Ain't Been Shot Mum, who were used to games having a set number of turns. And more recently, I mean, certainly for over 10 years now, we've used the force morale system, which is pretty much ubiquitous to most of our games now. Certainly TooFatLardies games. We wanted to move away from morale being something that happened to individual units and look instead at the overall morale of the force. As a mantra, militaries are not seeking to find their enemy and kill them all. Rather, they're looking to do enough physical and psychological damage to the enemy to oblige them to give up the fight, to either quit the field or surrender. What we also attempted to do was to not just fight until all of a sudden all the wheels came off and everything went bang and there was a complete collapse, but to model the disintegration of command and control in tandem with the morale of the troops. And we use a reduction of command dice to reflect that. Anybody who's played Chain of Command knows that losing one command dice is problematic, but losing 2 or 3 is a real body blow that changes the way you have to operate. Add to that the fact that the rules oblige you to look after shot-up units to protect your force morale, rather than just go, I don't really care about them because they're not going to do any good. And you've got a cocktail designed to make a force commander really feel under the cosh. When the end does come, it's rarely a complete and absolute collapse. Sometimes that can happen, though, as it can in real life. But it's usually the eventual submerging of the defeated side under a tide of misfortune. And this isn't just about creating a narrative, but actually about replicating the pressures a real commander would be under. You can tell that things are going wrong. You can feel that things are not going your way. And you need to fight that in order to regain control of the situation, to get back inside of your opponent's OODA loop. But is it perfect? Well, of course not. Looking back, I mean, if I feel that there is a gap in the system, I'd say that in scenarios where there's a tangible physical objective, capture the bridge if you like, then that should be reflected in the force morale tests. Now, to a degree, the capturing of jump-off points reflects the loss of ground and the loss of morale as a result of that. But it doesn't fully take into account the importance of a key objective being captured. However, what omitting that does do is it stops that lone figure that we talked about earlier sprinting onto the bridge, playing a chain of command dice to secure the ground, and winning a significant force morale victory by doing that, because it's implausible. It's an interesting and thus far unsolved conundrum. In game design, sometimes adding what looks like a good idea, or even obvious, in the case that you should suffer a force morale drop if you lose that key objective. But that can result in very gamey tactics that, rather than enhancing a game, actually break it and make it not fit for purpose.